How much time?
The gentleman has 22 more minutes remaining.
Whether those of us in Congress voted for the war or not, we all have grave concerns for the safety of our troops. But there's a sense in which the troops themselves become hostage to the war. We had so many moments when we were told that we should vote to continue to fund the wars, to support the troops. Now, Iraq, March 20th, 2011, the 8th anniversary. Afghanistan, already the longest war in our history, more than 10 years. How can we afford the lives anymore? How can the lost lives? How can we afford the deaths to innocent civilians? How can we afford the trillions upon trillions of dollars? There's a point at which we have to ask ourselves some fundamental questions. If we didn't go to war to make America safer, why did we go to war against Iraq? I maintained then, and I maintain now, that oil certainly had something to do with it. We have to ask ourselves, why are we still in Iraq? Why are we still in Afghanistan? Why are we continuing the incursions along the Pakistani border? Why are we still debating whether to become involved militarily in Libya? Don't we as Americans get to the point where we just say, maybe it's time we started taking care of things here at home first? 15 million Americans out of work. Think of how many jobs you could create with trillions of dollars. 50 million Americans still don't have health care. Over 10 million Americans have lost their homes. So many Americans go to bed hungry. So many Americans can't afford to send their kids to decent schools. So much of our public education system is failing because they don't have enough resources. And yet, we are spending trillions of dollars now on wars. One war based on lies, the other one based on a fundamental misreading of history. I mean, who in history has conquered Afghanistan? Well, maybe somebody can go back to Genghis Khan's time and answer that question, but you can't answer it in this century or the last century. Now, the House just had 2 hours of debate today on the issue of Afghanistan and war powers resolution. I'm pleased to see that more voted in favor of withdrawal this year than voted last year. It's a good sign, particularly since about 2/3 of the American people favor getting out of Afghanistan in the near future. I mean, it's easy to understand why the American people feel that way. The American people have to be feeling, how can we afford these wars? How can we afford to spend $1 million a day to equip a soldier, strike that, $1 million a year to equip a soldier in Afghanistan or Iraq for that matter? Don't we have things to take care of here at home? Mr. Speaker, I look at our cities, and all across this nation we have cities that are falling apart. Our infrastructure is falling apart. It's fair to say that we have trillions of dollars in infrastructure needs that are unmet. They're not being met because we're being told, well, we don't have enough money. As a matter of fact, some states are using the deficit to be able to crush workers' rights. But we know that when it comes to these wars are contributing to the deficit. In one way or another, we end up borrowing money to keep these wars going. How can these wars be more important than everything else in America? We know right now that occupations fuel insurgency in Afghanistan. Our presence there has caused the Taliban to become stronger. Our actions there help ensure the Taliban will have even more support. General Petraeus himself, with respect to Afghanistan, said, well, al-Qaeda doesn't have much of a presence anymore. What are we doing there? How can we keep affording the kind of money that we're spending there? The American people are saying it loud and clear. They want out. But what I wanted to do this evening, though, is to bring us back to the time that Congress was faced with the decision about going to war against Iraq. That we were told things by Vice President Cheney. We were told things by President Bush. Now they want to blame it on some character called curveball. Look, when I was growing up, if somebody was throwing you a curveball, you knew what that meant. It meant that it wasn't coming at you straight, it was coming like this, okay? It was almost like somebody in the CIA was telegraphing to all of us, hey, this guy's a curveball, be very careful about this pitch that he's making. But anyhow, this character curveball, when it comes to WMDs, he said he made it all up. Said that he had a problem with the Saddam regime. He wanted to get rid of them. And he had the chance. Now, there are those who would say, well, see? It was this guy. He said this. We were fooled. Right, yeah. No. Those who were charged with the responsibility of taking this country into war against Iraq, they weren't fooled. They cooked the books with respect to the intelligence. They had the intelligence shaped to fit their preconceived designs to go to war. For them to try to maintain they were fooled would be an interesting defense. The former head of the CIA in Europe, Tyler Drumheller, wasn't fooled. He warned against the reliability of curveball, but the administration at that time, the Bush administration, offered no alternatives to the Congress. So instead of accepting the truth that Iraq didn't possess WMDs, the Bush administration decided to pick and choose their facts in order to sell a war to the American people at a cost of trillions of dollars. When I think of the road that we have gone down, when I think, Mr. Speaker, that someone in the Bush administration, way back when we were about to attack Iraq, announced that he thought the Iraq war would cost $100 billion, Larry Lindsey, he was fired for that. $100 billion. Imagine now, this war is going to cost 30 times that, if not 50 times it, when you look at the long-term effect of caring for the rest of their lives for the soldiers who come back maimed. Let's bring it back. On March the 20th, 2003, the United States Armed Forces, at the direction of President George W. Bush, commenced a very vigorous and violent attack upon the nation of Iraq and its people. That was the beginning of of the Iraq War, and it was the beginning of the United States assault on and subsequent occupation of Iraq. And he did it because this Congress approved of it. And this Congress approved of it because we were told that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that Iraq had the intention and capability of hurting the United States, that Iraq had something to do with 9/11 and al-Qaeda's role in 9/11. Mr. Speaker, all false. Now, the Bible says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." We are taught that truth crushed to the ground will rise again. We are waiting to be freed from the lies that took us into war, but we cannot be freed until we have a reconciliation with the people of Iraq. And we can't do that until we have truth. America is going to have to go through that period. We will never recover from 9/11 if we continue to move down the rabbit holes of war that were based on lies or based on a misreading of history and a misapplication of power. Mr. Speaker, could I ask how many more minutes I have left?
The gentleman has 10 minutes remaining.
So where do we go from here? Well, we have to get ready to leave Iraq. And we have to get ready to leave Afghanistan. And we have to stop bombing the borders along Pakistan. We have to start working with the international community on matters of security. And if we need to continue to track down anyone who's associated with mass violence against the people of our country or any other country, that should be a matter of international police action. And we must stop the policies of interventionism. We must stop the reach for empire. It is destroying our nation. It's destroying us morally, and it's destroying our capacity to be able to meet the needs of the American people for jobs, for housing, for health care, for education, for retirement security. We have to challenge the underlying premise about war being inevitable, because as soon as people start beating the drums of war, there's an entire marching band and chowder society at the Pentagon and with their people in the contracting business who are ready to try to make a case for war at any time and any place. We have to begin to critically analyze the mentality that issues forth that causes us to put so much of our resources on the line. General Eisenhower warned about it. He had served as President of this United States 2 terms, and he recognized in his valedictory that we should beware of the military-industrial complex. We have to be careful about what we're being told and the motivations of those from outside this Congress who are telling us certain stories about why we should go to war. It is time for us to try to come into resonance with our power to achieve diplomacy. I'm not naive about the world. But I also understand that if we do not try to exercise our capacity to relate to people in other places, people who may have different ideologies, different religions, different colors, creeds, if we do not try to pursue that, then we are destined to have more wars. But if we pursue what President Franklin Roosevelt called the science of human relations, then we have the possibility that we can move towards making peace, not war, inevitable. It's that type of thinking that led me to bring forward a proposal to create a cabinet-level Department of Peace. I know there's people who say, oh, peace, right. Okay, Dennis, we got it. You want peace. Next. And they try to project peace as impractical. Mr. Speaker, let's talk impractical? How about a war based on lies that cost this country over $3 trillion? That's impractical. How about a war that costs the lives of over 1 million innocent Iraqi civilians? A war that cost the lives of thousands upon thousands of our troops and tens of thousands of our troops injured. That's impractical. We need to summon our capacity and our capabilities to be able to take this nation in a new direction that does not include a quest or reach for empire. that pulls back its military resources, which are spread all around the world to the cost of tens of trillions of billions of dollars annually, tens of billions annually, and we need to start coming home. Create peace at home. Look at the gun violence in our society. Let's go to domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, violence in the school, gang violence, racial violence, violence against gays. If we started to focus on addressing violence in our society, the causal nature of it, not just the symptoms of it, not just the effects of it, we may put ourselves on a path where we could, in our nation, create what many years ago people called a New Jerusalem, a shining city on a hill, the potential to be able to have all of our material concerns met and be able to have peace. Frankly, I don't know any other way that we can do it except working towards peace. But we have to build structures of peace in our own nation, in our own neighborhoods. That's what legislation to create a Department of Peace is about. It's not creating a new bureaucracy. We spend, think about it, if we spend more than $1 trillion every year for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the Pentagon budget all combined, wouldn't you think we ought to have a few bucks available to talk about how we can create a more peaceful society so we don't doom future generations to continue to support this endless wars, these endless wars? We have to start redefining who we are as a people. And this is as good a time as any to begin to do it. We are on the 8th anniversary of the initiation of the war against Iraq, March 20th, 2011. In the last hour, Mr. Speaker, I've sought to create a review of the record of what was said at the time to bring about the war, how the President and the Vice President at that time did not tell the truth to the American people, did not tell the truth to Congress, how the consequences have been extraordinary for the people of Iraq, for the people of the United States, how many innocent civilians died, how we have to find a way to reconcile with the people of Iraq, how we will have to find a way to reconcile at some point with the people in Afghanistan, the innocents who have died, how we have to recognize that there are some things in the world that are beyond our control, that we can't tell other people what kind of political system they should have. We cannot try to redesign the world according to what our idea of a democracy is. Wouldn't it be nice if here in the United States we actually focused on creating the fullness of the democratic process which we were assured would have the chance to unfold with the independence of the United States and with the creation of our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, I intend to keep bringing forth the truth of what happened that resulted in the United States being taken into war against Iraq based on lies. And I intend to keep bringing forward alternatives so that we can not just get out of Iraq and Afghanistan, but stop this reach for power abroad, which comes at the expense of our vital needs at home. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
I'm going to bring those charts down.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask the unanimous consent to invite to extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, Mr. Speaker, I wish every one of my colleagues and everybody in America would listen to this special order tonight, not because I want the attention, but I just think there's some facts that the American people ought to know and my colleagues ought to know about our dependence on energy from other parts of the world. You know, it really bothers me that we continue to depend so much on our adversaries or people that aren't our friends than we do on ourselves. We could be energy independent within a relatively short period of time, and I'm talking about 5 to 10 years, if we just did certain things. And so tonight what I want to do is I want to point out to my colleagues and anybody else that might be paying attention where the energy is in America, what it is, and how difficult it would be to extract it. Now, right now, people that are paying attention in their offices know that we're paying $3.60 or more for a gallon of gasoline. Diesel fuel is over $4 a gallon. And my chief of staff went to the grocery store the other day, and he told me he bought 2 tomatoes and it cost $5. He bought 1 avocado and it cost $3. Now, people are telling me there's no inflation. That's baloney. The cost of food is going up, the cost of gasoline is going up, the cost of everything is going up, and in large part it's going up because the cost of energy is rising very, very rapidly. And it need not to be that way. I talked to a fellow the other day that came in to see me about new technologies, and he told me if we developed our coal shale, converted it into oil, we could lower the price per barrel of oil from $105 a barrel to $30 a barrel. Do you know what that would do to the price of gasoline if we were to do that? It would lower the price of gasoline from $3.60 down to about $1.40 or $1.30 a gallon. And what do you think that would do to the economy? What would that do to lowering the prices of goods and services that we go all the way across the country in dealing with? And yet we're not doing anything. And so I want to read tonight a little bit about where we are, what we can do, and what we can accomplish if we just start paying attention to what's here in the United States. The old adage goes that those who don't learn from history are going to make the same mistakes over and over again. And apart from creating what we call the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in this country, we haven't done anything over the last 30 years to become energy independent. Now, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a reserve we set up so that if we have an emergency, we'll have some oil in the ground that we could use for energy purposes, and it goes for maybe 90 days. But 90 days is not a very long time, and we could exhaust that in a very short period of time if we don't move toward energy independence. Right now, on the northern tier of Africa, everybody that's paying attention knows that we got problems in Libya, we got problems in Egypt, problems in Tunisia, problems all along the Persian Gulf Coast, Bahrain and the other countries. And we've got Iran there. And there's a real possibility that we could see a terrible problem occur there in the future, which would minimize our ability to get oil from that part of the world. We get over 30% of our energy from countries in that region and other places in the world where people don't like us very much. And if that place goes up in smoke, the cost of energy, the cost of gasoline, the cost of everything that we have is going to skyrocket. And so we've got to do something about that. In 1972, we imported 28% of our oil and energy from outside this country. You know what it is today? It's 62%. So we said we're going to be energy independent. It was 28% in the 70s. We said we're going to be energy independent. A lot of people remember the long gas lines when OPEC tried to do us in. They remember people carrying gas cans to get 5 gallons of gas to get to work. They remember all that. But we didn't do anything but create the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is only a 90-day supply. And so we imported 26% or thereabouts in the 70s, and today, instead of being energy independent, we're importing 62%. We're more dependent on Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, and other parts of the world now than we were then by more than double our dependency on foreign oil. Today, oil has gone up to over $105 a barrel. It may be down a little bit now. We're paying, in many parts of the country, close to $4 a gallon for gasoline and over $4 a gallon for diesel fuel, which transports our goods and services across this country. Oil is the lifeblood of this country. It supplies more than 40% of our energy needs and 99% of the fuel that we use in our cars and trucks. They talk about the new Volt automobile, electric car. That's going to solve our problems. They talk about windmills. They're going to solve our problems. They talk about nuclear energy, which is very problematic right now. They talk about all these other things, including solar energy. But all of that combined will not put a dent, not even a dent, in our energy needs. And as we know right now, 99% of the fuel that we need for our cars and trucks comes from oil. And our current energy demand is about 21.5 million barrels of oil a day. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is for every 1 penny that it costs more for gasoline, it increases the cost to consumers by $4 million a day. So every time you go to the gas pump and you see the gas price has gone up a penny or a nickel or 10 cents, for each penny, it's $4 million hit on our economy each and every day. Now, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, but I won't have time to get into all of them tonight. But the thing that's very disconcerting to me is that we have the energy that we need right here. Now, for instance, if you look at this chart, this is the oil production in this country. Now, where's my figures on the barrels of oil? If we use the recoverable oil that we have, the natural gas that we have, and the coal resources that we have, that's equivalent to 1.3 trillion barrels of oil. 1.3 trillion. Now, when you realize that we're only using about, 21 million barrels of oil a day, you can see that we would have an almost inexhaustible supply of oil if we just used the resources that we have. Now, let me just give you some examples. In the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, we have about 10.4 billion barrels of oil, more than double the proven reserves of the entire state of Texas, and almost half the total proven reserves in the U.S., which is 22 billion barrels of oil. That's just in ANWR alone, almost half of what we need. If we drilled in ANWR, we could increase our reserves by nearly 50% in that one area. President Clinton vetoed the ANWR energy production in 1995, and the United States could be today getting almost 1.5 million barrels of oil a day if we did that. But instead of moving toward energy independence, we continue to talk about it, but we don't do anything about it. And currently, the President of the United States will not allow us to get new permits to drill offshore in the Gulf of Mexico or off the continental shelf or in ANWR or any place else. We just aren't drilling, and so we continue to import oil. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but we spill more oil from the oil tankers that bring oil from Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. We spill more oil each and every day than the oil that was spilled from that horrible tragedy that took place in the Gulf of Mexico. And yet we continue to import with these tankers. And we say, well, it's an environmental problem because look at what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. That's an excuse to not drill in this country because we are wasting energy by not getting it right here. And as I said before, we're spilling more out of those tankers than we had in the Gulf of Mexico tragedy. So we ought to be drilling, and we can do it in an environmentally safe way if the government of the United States and our regulators make sure they watch these oil wells. The technology is there. Now, as I said before, we have 1.8 trillion barrels of oil and as much as 8 trillion barrels of oil if we use the deposits that we have of oil shale. Maybe I haven't said that yet, but we do have. Now listen to this. I had a fellow come in to see me the other day, and I may have mentioned it to some of the people earlier, and I sometimes get mixed up because we've covered this thing before. But he told me that if we drilled here and used oil shale, we could reduce the cost of oil dramatically, as much as 60 or 70%. And it would reduce overall cost of energy dramatically to our houses, our cars, and our trucks, which bring goods and services and food all across this country. Currently, the United States produces roughly 30 trillion cubic feet of natural gas every year. 30 trillion feet of natural gas every year. If we went after the Marcellus Shale Formation, where they have 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, we could more than double our domestic production of natural gas almost immediately. And we could use that natural gas to move our trucks. I had some of the leaders in the natural gas industry come to see me not too long ago, and they told me if we just converted our 18-wheelers that transport goods and services across this country and food, if we just converted those to natural gas, we could cut our dependency on foreign oil by 50%. That one thing. And yet we're not drilling for that natural gas because the administration will not give the permits and move to utilize those resources that we have. The Obama administration, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's intentional or just because of ignorance, but they're not using our resources and not exploring for our resources. It makes me wonder sometimes if the environmental extremists in this country don't want us to go back to horse and buggy and using wood to heat our houses. Well, they wouldn't want wood to be used to heat our houses because obviously they're concerned about things like the spotted owl. But the fact of the matter is, we in this country could reduce our cost of living, could reduce our dependency on foreign oil. All we have to do is use our resources, but we need the administration to do what's necessary. And at a time when the world is on the precipice of some major wars, we need to move toward energy independence. If the Persian Gulf goes up in smoke, it's going to be disastrous for this economy. If Venezuela and President Chavez down there, who is a communist dictator, if he decides not to let us have the oil that we've been buying from him, it would be tragic for this country. And he's working with Tehran. They have flights going back once every week, back and forth, and they're working together for things that are other than the good of the United States of America. And so we're dependent on people that don't like us, would like to see our free enterprise system and the freedoms we enjoy dissipate into nothing, and we're continuing to depend on them for foreign energy. You know, the President has said it's a real danger to drill in the Gulf of Mexico. We want to protect the environment, and yet we just sent $1 billion down to Brazil so they could drill offshore. Now think about that. We're concerned about the environment, and yet we're sending billions of our taxpayers' dollars to a country like Brazil so they can do deep water exploration for oil. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The administration, just to let people know what's going on in their offices, the administration canceled 77 offshore drilling leases in Utah, or onshore drilling leases in Utah, just weeks after taking office. So we had 77 onshore in the continental United States drilling leases in Utah that were going to be used to bring oil to the surface and natural gas, and they stopped those weeks after they took office. And they later reoffered only 17 of them. So 60. We lost 60 potential areas of oil and gas. The administration's consistently delayed oil and shale development leases. The administration has repeatedly blocked development, as I said before, in places like the ANWR. And I've been up to Alaska. People talk about how it's going to hurt the environment up there and the bears and all the other animals. The ANWR is way out in the boondocks. It's not going to hurt a thing. People don't realize Alaska's 3.5 times the size of Texas. There's only 500,000 people up there. There's tremendous oil and other natural gas resources up there, and we can't drill for them because of environmental concerns. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. America's reliance on oil and natural gas is going to continue for decades to come. There's no question about it. When the administration says we have to transition to other forms of energy, nuclear and solar and wind and hydrothermia ways of getting energy, that's great. All of us want to do that. We all want a clean environment. But in the meantime, we have to rely on fossil fuels because we're not going to be able to get where they want us to be by relying on these other sources of energy for at least 10, 15, or 20 years. So what are we supposed to do in the meantime? I don't think we should continue to be dependent on foreign sources of energy. America's reliance on natural gas, as I said, is going to continue for decades to come. And trying to ignore that reality by arguing that it takes time for new fields to come online is simply passing the buck to the next generation. If we responded to the widespread outcry to drill 3 years ago, the last time oil and gasoline prices were over $1.50 a gallon or $3.50 a gallon, we'd be that much closer to having additional supplies of domestic energy. But we aren't. We're importing 62% of our energy, and just a couple of decades ago it was only 26 or 28%. Expanding America's energy production will lower prices, create new jobs, reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and strengthen our national security, and raise revenue to help tackle our historic $14 trillion in national debt. One of the things that I hope all young people in this country will realize, and all the seniors will realize, that we're passing on to that young generation $14 trillion in debt. The debt has increased in the last 3 years by $4 trillion. From the beginning of the Republic to the last 3 or 4 years, we didn't come close to that kind of spending. And yet we increased the debt in 3 years by $4 trillion. Obamacare is going to add a great deal more to that, in addition to rationing health care and all the other things that people have heard about. But the thing that concerns me the most is the standard of living that we have today and what we're passing on to the future generations. By not becoming energy independent, by running up these huge debts because we're coming up with these new programs that we can't afford, by creating a bigger bureaucracy in Washington, including 15,000 new IRS agents to implement the rules and regulations of things like Obamacare. All those things are going to add to the debt, and the quality of life that I've had and my parents had is going to deteriorate. And I'm afraid we pass on to our children and our grandchildren higher taxes, higher inflation, a lower standard of living because we're living way beyond our means today. And natural gas and oil shale, coal shale and oil are ways that we could cut our dependence on foreign oil and reduce that dependency on government and lower the cost that we're incurring as far as our national debt's concerned. I don't know what we have to do to convince the administration. Sometimes I wonder if it's because they're not aware of the future, they're not aware of what's going on, or maybe they're just doing it on purpose because the President believes in more government control over various parts of our society. 1/6 of our society is health care, and that's been nationalized by the Obamacare plan, which we're trying to repeal because that'll create long lines to get to see a doctor and socialized medicine. And that's all a result of more government control and more government spending and more national debt. Can you imagine what it would be like if we came back in 50 years? I probably won't be around then. I'm sure I won't. But we come back in 50 years and there's some young person who's struggling to get along, and they say, why in the world did our fathers and grandfathers leave this kind of a society for us? They lived so much better. The cost of living was lower. The cost of energy was lower. The cost of health care was lower. Everything was lower. They lived so much better than us. Why didn't they do something to make sure we had that quality of life? And the answer is simply, we're not doing it. We're opening up the government credit card. We're charging all this money. We're depending on other sources of energy from other countries, and the credit card just keeps gathering steam and gathering more debt and gathering more debt and gathering more debt. If my colleagues in their offices were paying attention right now and they said to their wives, we overspent last month by $5,000, what are we going to do? Their wives and the wives of the people that might be paying attention would say, we've got to cut back on spending. We've got to budget our money. We can't live like this. We'll go bankrupt. And I tell you right now, America is in the same situation. We will go bankrupt. In fact, we are bankrupt, but we're printing money as fast as we can to keep from declaring bankruptcy. They talk about Social Security being insolvent in 15 or 20 years. If you go into the vaults and look at Social Security receipts, it's all a bunch of paper. They've used that money for other purposes. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul for Medicare and Social Security as we live today. And so we just add to the debt and add to the liability that we leave to the future generations. So if I were talking to the President tonight, Mr. Speaker, I would say, Mr. President, if you love this country as much as we love this country, then take steps to do what's necessary to cut spending, to do away with a lot of these wasteful programs that aren't accomplishing anything, to make sure that we come up with a health care plan that does not create a dependency on government but on the private sector, by doing tort reform and coming up with savings accounts so people can deduct from their taxes so that they can pay for a lot of their own health care needs. There's a whole bunch of things we could do without socialized medicine. So I'd say to Mr. President, let's look at these other avenues. Let's reevaluate Obamacare and come up with a solution that's not going to put this country in red ink for ad infinitum. And I'd say these new programs you're talking about are the programs that we've tried for years and years and years that have been nothing but a drain on taxpayers' dollars but haven't improved anything. Let me give you one example, and I hate to digress from this energy issue, but I think it's important that we talk about this. If you look at the grade levels in our schools and high schools and our colleges across this country, you'll find in the last 20 years The grade levels have not gotten better. The quality of education has not gotten better. But if you look at the chart and see how much we're spending through the Department of Education at the federal level, you'll find that we're spending accomplishing a thing except paying a lot of bureaucrats' salaries and sending money back to some of the unions that feel like they need that money to take care of their union members, and those union members continue to support people who want to keep that gravy train going. So there are things we could do. We could say, let's leave education where it belongs, at the state and local level, where it's always been, instead of spending all this money at the local level. Do away with the Department of Education. We could do that and save hundreds of billions of dollars, and that money could be passed on to debt reduction and lower our dependence on the future generations of this country. I'd like to just end tonight, Mr. Speaker, by saying that if you look at these charts, you'll see, first of all, we have unbelievable trillions of cubic feet of natural gas in the United States. All these pink spaces here show where shale gas is in the lower 48 states, and it doesn't even include Alaska. And those trillions of cubic feet of natural gas could be brought out of the ground and used to take care of our energy needs to a very large degree. And as a matter of fact, the coal shale, let's put that chart up here. The coal shale that we have, they estimate that the amount of coal shale we have in this country would create 1.8 to 8 trillion barrels of oil. 1.8 to 8 trillion barrels of oil right here in this country. And it would immediately reduce our dependency on foreign oil. And you think that the Saudis and the others wouldn't lower their price per barrel very quickly if they thought we were producing that? You're just not paying attention. Because if they saw that we were becoming energy independent, they would want to keep their market share, and they would lower their prices as quickly as possible. And then you talk about coal itself. We have tremendous resources of coal, 584.5 billion tons. Our reserves in coal at these blue places that you see on the map is 4 trillion tons of coal. Now, they say that that'll hurt the environment. Well, we've got to make sure that we protect the environment, and we've got scrubbers on the generating plants and all kinds of things that do protect the environment. But even if we had an environmental problem, we would still work to clean that up. But even if we had that, do we still want to be dependent for our existence, for the defense of this nation, for the economy of this nation, on foreign sources of energy like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and others that don't like us and would love to see us go down, go under? We need to use our resources. And the President is succumbing to pressure from radical environmentalists and others to not drill for these resources. Natural gas, coal shale that can be converted into oil, oil that we have onshore and offshore, and coal itself. It's time that we realize that we can be energy independent. The future of America can be great. We can see this city, as Ronald Reagan said, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years as a shining city on a hill if we move toward energy independence. That one thing alone would help solve our problems, our economic problems. And it's a defense issue as well as a national economic issue. So, like I said, if I were talking to the President tonight, and I presume from time to time the White House does watch what we're doing on the floor, I would say, Mr. President, if you love this country, and I believe you do, I would start doing what's necessary to move toward energy independence. And you will be revered as a great president if you do that, and you'll probably get reelected. But if we continue with this huge deficit spending that in large part is caused by our dependence on foreign energy, then you run the risk of being a one-term president. And so I think the President, being a patriotic citizen, as I believe and hope he is, will take to heart what we're talking about in this body and become as close to as possible to energy independence within the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years. And if he would do this, his legacy that will be left behind will be something that we'll all be proud of. If we don't do that, and I were talking to the President, I'd say your legacy will not be very bright, Mr. President. And I don't think any president wants to leave behind for history that kind of a legacy. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll just say that I hope that everybody's paid attention to this tonight, and I will be back on the floor to talk about this in the future, and I yield back the balance of my time. Oh, wait just a minute. Excuse me. What is it we have? Who's coming? Louis Gohmert's coming. So you want me to extend my special order so Louis can get here? And what does Louis need? Well, we have another colleague that wants to come over. So I'm not going to do my imitation of Al Jolson or tap dance, but I guess I could talk about the deficit for a little longer. What do you think? Let me have the rest of that information. I was going to save that for the next special order. Let me have that. Okay, thank you. All right. Well, let's give you some facts and figures while Louis is on his way over here. I was going to save this for my next special order, but we'll cover it right now. The total demand for coal reached 1.12 billion tons in 2008, and over half of our electricity is generated from coal. So you can imagine if we don't do what's necessary to get coal out of the ground, we're going to become more dependent on foreign sources of energy. 9 out of every 10 tons of coal mined in every year in the U.S. is used for domestic electricity. So when they tell you we can't use coal anymore because of environmental concerns, well, what are we going to do? Because 9 out of every 10 tons of coal is used for electric generation. Each person in this country, and everybody that's paying attention, uses 3.7 tons of coal a year. So what are we going to do without it if we don't have it? Coal is the most affordable source of power fuel per million BTUs historically, averaging less than a quarter of the price of gas and oil. And there are approximately 600 coal generating facilities generating 1.4 generating units in manufacturing utilities across this country, according to the U.S. Energy Information. And coal accounts for 32% of U.S. total energy and 23% of total energy consumption. Now, that's all I want to talk about coal about. But it's important that we realize that we are dependent on that source of energy, and we need to continue to use it until we come up with an alternative that's going to work and will be with us. And solar and wind and the other sources will replace that over time. But we're still going to need oil, coal, and gas for at least 10 or 15 or 20 years at the levels or more than at the levels that we're using today. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Is this all you have for me, Brian? That's it? Okay, Louis is sprinting over here. Mr. Speaker? He's on his way? I have 32 minutes left, and I can talk for about anything, I guess, but I don't want to bore my colleagues back in their offices or anybody else that's paying attention to this, other than to say the charts that we have here are things that everybody ought to be familiar with, and I will be happy to make these available to my colleagues. It shows that we have plenty of oil, coal, and natural gas, and coal shale to take care of our energy needs within the next decade if we just get on with it. I'm telling you, this is embarrassing. Where is Louis? Where's Chris Smith? Is Chris coming over?
He hasn't showed up yet either, so if he's not here, he's probably not going to. Can we reserve our time for the moment?
I will stand here for a minute, Mr. Speaker, and I'll reserve my time until he gets here.
Gohmert is on his way. It's not your time. It's his own time.
Oh, he says his own time?
You've got to stretch until he gets here. You don't have to wait.
Well, because we don't have somebody on the other side coming in? Because everybody's gone home.
Talk about Indiana.
Well, let me just tell you one thing that's very interesting. Everybody's gone home. Everybody's going back to their districts, and it's kind of interesting that these issues that we're talking about here tonight are so important, and yet people are going back to their districts to talk to their constituents. I wish I had been able to talk to them before they left and give them copies of all these illustrations so that they could go to their town meetings and show to the people of this country that we do have the energy we need to be independent. and I will try to do that next week, next time we have a recess and they go back to their districts for their for their town meetings. Do you know any good songs or anything? I could do my imitation of Al Jolson. I used to be pretty good at that. Do you know who Al Jolson was? I imagine the people in the gallery know who Al Jolson was. Bear with us, folks. We're waiting on Louis. The rules of the House, for those of you who are wondering why I'm standing down here, the rules of the House are that when we adjourn at night, we have what's called special orders. And when we have the special orders, each side gets 1 hour, and I'm taking the leadership hour on the Republican side. Each side gets 1 hour to discuss issues of relevance to the American people and to their colleagues. And then, after that, each side gets a half an hour. And we go back and forth like that till we've used up 6 hours of time, 4 hours of time. And so my colleague, Mr. Gohmert, who's on his way over here right now, is going to use, I presume, part of our second half hour when he gets here. And I imagine Louis is going to be talking about constitutional law because he was a judge, and he'll also be talking about the national debt and the legacy we're leaving behind for our kids. And so when Louis gets here, after I hit him in the nose for not being here on time, I'll turn it over to him and let him talk about these issues. What are you laughing at? We have the staff up here, and I think they're getting a little giggly since we're here not talking about anything of relevance. Where's Louis coming from? The moon? We've got the press up there that's being entertained. Huh? Oh, it's St. Patrick's Day. You don't think he's been having a little green libation, do you?
What else is on your mind, sir?
Well, I guess I should digress and talk about some of the other issues facing this country. There's so many. But I don't want to get started on that and then have Louis come in and have to stop my discussion right in the middle of our talk. Yes. Now, you need to write about this in the papers, folks. Well, there's a new movie out. You know, last night they had an Irish-American function here in the Capitol, and they had some of those Irish dancers that were extraordinary. And I was watching television this morning, and they had Michael Flatley on, who's got a new movie that's coming out today about the Irish dancers. And I would urge all of my friends and neighbors to go see that movie if they like Irish dancing. And folks, I want you to know that Dr. Judge Louis Gohmert, with his green tie, has just arrived. And Louis, what are you going to talk about tonight?
Appreciate the gentleman yielding.
No, wow.
We're going to talk some about the CR. We're going to talk about government spending and what we ought to be doing.
Well, there you have it, folks. See, I was very psychic. I told you he'd be talking about government spending and how we can get the control of this budget. And so with that, Louis, since you're here and since you're such a great friend and a former judge from Texas, are you not ready yet?
Oh, I'm ready, but I think the gentleman will need to yield back. Otherwise, he'll have to stay on the floor the whole time I'm here.
Louis, you know I've been here a long time and I know the rules. I just wanted to make sure you were ready.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2001, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am grateful to my dear friend Dan Burton. He is a patriotic American. He stands for what he believes in, and if we had a lot more Dan Burtons in Washington, the country would be that much better off. So we're grateful to him and his service. It is an honor to serve in this body. It's been rather frustrating lately. And one of the things I wanted to mention was that another good friend, a former fellow judge, as I was, a district judge, I lost credibility as far as some of the district judges believed when I became Chief Justice of a Court of Appeals. But my friend Ted Poe from Houston is pushing a bill that I'm sure glad to co-sponsor with him. I'm glad he's doing it. It goes a bit hand in hand with a bill that I've been pushing ever since I've been here. But Congressman Poe's bill would allow an up or down vote on all the different countries that to whom we provide foreign assistance. It's a good idea. I mean, for all of the years that I've been here in each Congress, 3 times we have filed a UN voting accountability bill, and my friend Ted Poe has been on that bill co-sponsoring with us, and I'm glad to support his bill. My bill simply says any country that votes against us more than half the time gets no foreign assistance the following year. We know there's sometimes when there are emergencies, there are things we need to do, and so there's an exception for that in the event of an international emergency. But otherwise, we're not going to tell foreign countries how they vote in the UN, but you can tell a lot about who is your friend and who isn't by who stands with you during difficult times and on difficult issues. And you're able to discern who has the same moral beliefs as you do. For example, there are countries where Sharia law is the rule of the land, and life does not have the value that we in America believe that God gave life to have. So it's okay. In fact, you can find your way to paradise, some believe. And not all Muslims believe this, but there are those who believe that you can find your way to paradise and a differing number of virgins waiting for you if you die while you're killing infidels, people that don't believe in the same things you do. Well, that's fine. But if you believe in torturing, killing, taking innocent lives for nothing, just because of someone's religious beliefs, then we should not be financing that. It was deeply troubling to see that in Egypt, one account said that President or King, whatever you want to call him, Mubarak, had $70 billion in the bank. Another account said he had $7 billion in the account. Either way, can't help but wonder if that couldn't be a whole lot of U.S. taxpayer dollars back when we weren't having to borrow to give away money like that as we are now. We were given $2 billion or so a year, and it wouldn't be surprising if most of that money were United States dollars that had been given to Egypt On the other hand, we know that there are despots, there are dictators, there are corrupt leaders of countries around the world who believe that it's fine to even force women to have abortion, as my friend Chris does, and I both believe abortion's inappropriate. It's wrong. It is taking innocent life. And yet we're just handing money out around the world, hand over fist, and people take innocent lives of the unborn, of others. We know that there was about to be a hanging of a man who was converted from Islam to Christianity over in Afghanistan, and we're still just pouring money into Karzai regime. There are issues about him and his brother, whether or not there's corruption there. We're just pouring money in there that we don't have. And we're having to pay 42 cents of every dollar that we're giving to somebody else for loans, because we don't have the money to do that. And in any event, my friend Chris Smith is here and would be happy to yield such time as... Sure, whatever, yes.
Well, I want to thank
So I would yield such time as he may consume to my friend.
I thank my very good friend and